Thank you for the invitation. My name is Alberto. I'm a lawyer. I work in a law firm based in Torino, Italy. We work almost exclusively with foreign citizens, asylum seekers, and foreign citizens in general. I have to say quite a lot of these clients that we assist mostly through publicly funded projects are minors, are unaccompanied minors who arrive on the Italian territory, and some of them also have problems with the law, criminal law. And so this is the point where my work experience, which is a very practitioner's experience that I want to bring to the table this morning. You know, this is the moment when my experience crisscrosses with the topics that we are discussing this morning. And my presentation will largely echo what Pippo just said in much more eloquently than I will. And I will try to give a practitioner's angle to put into practice a lot of the principles and of the critical aspects that Pippo has already mentioned in his presentation just a minute ago. And I will try to do this by going over together with you a personal story of, it's a true story of a client of mine who arrived in Italy when he was a minor. And we will go through this story in a second. And I will try to highlight what I believe are the more critical points in this person's story. His name is Khalid, it's a fictional name. And at the end of this presentation, you will tell me if the Italian justice system has been child-friendly towards this unaccompanied minor or not. So let me just share a few slides that I will use. So let me introduce you to Khalid. It's a fictional name. It's a fictional photo, of course. Short background to Khalid. So he's 17-year-old when he arrives in Italy. He's from Egypt. From rural Egypt. It's an area with widespread violence, especially towards his community. He's a Christian. In his area, there are Islamist fundamentalists who are very active and they target Christians. More generally, in his area, violence is quite widespread. Lots of firearms, family disputes that often end up in, using weapons and stuff. He comes from a relatively poor family. He was a bartender serving tea in his cousin's tea shop. That's what Khalid did in Egypt, very little education. So this is his background. Maybe he was even a troublemaker back home. We don't know, but he was certainly afraid of serving in the army. So the moment of the call of duty was approaching. And his family decides that it's best for Khalid to leave and to find hopefully better opportunities, maybe even more education and a more decent job in Europe. And this is how he sets off. They pay a smuggler and they put him on a boat and he arrives in Italy after a perilous journey. So this is the first chapter of Khalid's story, arrival in Italy. So let's see how the, and again, you will find a lot of what I'm saying is just a practical application of what Pippo just said a minute ago. And so let's see how the Italian system received a minor like Khalid. Well, first of all, he arrived in Sardinia on an island in Italy, and that's not where he wanted to go. He wanted to go to Milan, where his family told him there's a cousin. So he leaves the center, the reception center in Sardinia. He goes to Milan, and only to find out that his cousin is not so eager to host him. He has his life a family, he has his job, and he doesn't have a room to spare for Khalid. So that's where Khalid starts being on his own, and he tries to get into a reception center for minors, just you know, an overnight facility, except they have no place for him. They fail to alert social services. A legal guardian is never appointed for him. What does Khalid do? Well, he resorts to his own community. He finds other people from Northern Africa, Egyptians, Moroccans, who are living on the street. Of course, he has no residence permit, no permit of stay. As you most likely know, all minors in Italy cannot be expelled, so they are automatically entitled to a residence permit. But of course, the system needs to take care of that for you. Otherwise, you will never know how to get it as an unaccompanied minor. So Khalid has no residence permit. He finds himself, as I said, wandering around the streets with fellow nationals. He has no money. So these people, they need to find something to eat. Frankly speaking, they also try to find something to smoke. And this is how they make a living. They are out on the street on their own, a bunch of kids. This is an important point that I want to make, because there's always a part of, let's call it cultural clash, to be a bit explicit. We could say it more, I'm sure people would know how to say this more subtly, but there is, and this is where he was mentioning not only the individual assessment, but also the generalized assessment on foreign minors. There is a lack of knowledge and a lack of awareness to some extent. I mean, they know that killing somebody is illegal, of course, but to a more subtle degree, foreigners, when they arrive in Italy, they're not fully aware of what the exact Italian laws say, what kind of behavior is not tolerated, what is tolerated, what is appropriate, not appropriate, acceptable, not acceptable, but notably what is criminally relevant and what is not, because of course all people who are on the territory, they are presumed to know criminal law, even if you don't know that something is a crime. Well, that's no excuse. We all know that from our criminal law studies. But this is a principle that is not absolute. And you can always prove that you did not, there was no way for you to know that this was a criminal. And again, you know, this is a fine line. This is a fine line, but I can assure you that that some behavior that some communities of foreigners, especially minors, engage in Italy, I'm pretty sure that they don't know that it's so bad, or that that some criminal act could end up in long prison sentences, such as like 5 years of imprisonment. I was on a train, just on some anecdotal experience. I was on a train just very recently, on a night train from Milano to Torino. And I was in a cart which was full of North African kids. And these people, they were so they were so aggressive towards each other, and they were kidding. You could tell that they were kidding, but their way of goofing around as teenagers do was so violent to our eyes. They were, slapping each other, punching each other, flying kicks, kung fu almost kind of moves. And as long as everybody's fine with it, I guess it's fine. But sometimes the game can go a bit, it can become a bit too violent, and somebody might decide that they've had enough and they can start threatening you or report you to the police. And sometimes they do. And I have another client right now who is in jail for something like that. I'm not saying, I'm not being apologetic towards violence, but I'm just saying that sometimes there is a need to make an assessment of the background that some people come from. And their way of goofing around might be a bit different from the way of goofing around that Italian kids are used to. This client was saying, but come on, why am I in jail? You know, this guy, the victim, referring to the victim, this guy, he's a fellow citizen, he's a fellow Egyptian guy. And I was like, but that's no excuse. I mean, you cannot beat up an Italian guy, you cannot beat up an Egyptian guy, but in his eyes, he did nothing wrong. You know, it was just a brawl among friends, except it ended up in robbery charges, which are extremely serious charges under Italian laws. So again, the violent background, the country of origin, and the social laws, what is accepted, not accepted, might vary a lot. And so I think this difference, these cultural differences, they do need to be taken into account when making the individual assessment of the child's position that was repeatedly mentioned. So this is the crimes that he ended up being charged with. I mean, in this case, it was more clear cut. You know, they were stealing cell phones from other teenagers or robbing them, depending on the exact modes of commission. So Khalid ends up being arrested. So let's come to chapter 2. Khalid gets arrested. So what happens? Let's see how the system treated him. Of course, Khalid knows no lawyer in Italy. They appoint an ex officio lawyer for him. He gets also paid by the state through free legal aid because Khalid has no money. So that part works, except well, it's very hard for an Italian lawyer to be able to communicate in Arabic with his or her clients. So there's definitely a language barrier. How do you prepare a defense if your client is not able to tell you what happened? So definitely the quality of the defense that you end up getting as a foreigner in general, and especially as a minor, as an unaccompanied minor, is clearly worse quality than you would get if you are an Italian kid whose family maybe is friends with a lawyer or can afford, you know, a lawyer who's good at criminal law, et cetera, who is experienced. So you might get a very good ex officio lawyer, but it depends. It's a bit of a gamble. And definitely for everyone, there's a big language barrier. What about trial? The Italian criminal procedure code for minors foresees, for example, the presence of family members. They can be there. He's an unaccompanied minor, so no family there that can give him moral, support. The lawyer ends up entering a guilty plea. So they fail to make use of one of the key mechanisms in juvenile criminal proceedings in Italy, which is juvenile probation, messa alla prova. It's something that now exists also in criminal proceedings against adults, because it works pretty well. The goal of juvenile criminal proceedings is not to repress through putting people in jail, putting minors in jail, is to give people another chance to think about their mistakes, realize they've done something wrong, do something useful for the community, compensate the damage that you created, and reintegrate you into society as soon as possible. Correct the mistakes you might have received or mistakes that the gaps that there might have been in your upbringing and education. This is the idea. Of course, this is not going to happen if you enter a guilty plea and you end up in jail. The judgment becomes immediately final. There's no provisional release. There's no detention on remand, which would happen if you are tried. There's a first instance trial, then there's an appeal. Maybe while the proceedings are going on, you might get a provisional release because the judgment is not final and you cannot be kept in detention or remand forever. But this is not what happened in Khalid's case. The judgment became final, so no provisional release. He got 3 years and 4 months of imprisonment. The fact that the judgment becomes final also creates a major obstacle in obtaining a future permit of stay, because if you're a convicted offender, Italian law foresees impediments to your possibility of getting a permit of stay. Also, as an adult, this is a stain on your criminal record that is going to stay there, unfortunately, for a very long time, until you are able to access rehabilitation and delete the consequences of the criminal conviction. So what follows arrest and trial? You might have guessed it. There is juvenile detention. So chapter 3 in Khalid's story is detention. What happens in detention? Well, detention is an integral part of the juvenile justice system, isn't it? It's the way that you serve your sentence. And so that part of the system also needs to be child friendly, especially towards foreign unaccompanied minors, and God knows how many of them there are in Italian jails for the reasons that we will mention in a second. There's, the percentage of foreigners that are in Italian detention centers and prisons is, far outnumbers the percentage of foreigners that are out there in real life, so that there's many more in jail in percentage than there are in the free world. So what happens to a kid like Khalid, a 17-year-old? He speaks no Italian at all. He has somehow fails to understand why it's so bad what he did, and he ends up being detained. He does not understand why he's in jail. He still thinks that it's a big injustice perpetrated against him. He does not realize the gravity of what he did, which is serious. I'm not saying the opposite, according to the Italian criminal code, but he does not understand it. And that's a big problem, because he does not accept the fact that he's confined between 4 walls, that there's prison guards around him, that there's other kids who's, with dodgy faces and dodgy behaviors. So the reaction of a teenager is rebellion. He doesn't want to be there. He kicks around and he punches around walls, and he's even at some point he tries to escape, and the prison guards tell him, "Oh, you want to escape? That's the wall. Try and climb it. Go!" And he's like, "Okay, I'll give it a try." He doesn't even understand that it's so. That it's. I'm saying it's a joke, but it was a provocation by a guard who said, "Yeah, this is the wall. Climb it." So he tries to climb it, and they charge him with attempted escape. So more crimes. He ends up being restrained by security guards, and he kicks around, and he gets another charge for resisting the public authorities. So this is how the system risks becoming even criminogenic towards people like Khalid. There's a huge language barrier with prison guards as well. They don't speak Arabic, and he doesn't speak Italian. So how are they going to understand each other? Where occasionally there's a cultural mediator in prison, a very nice Moroccan lady who comes like 2 mornings a week. She speaks with, she has some meetings with the inmates. She explains some things, but again, she's there like 2 mornings a week. So what about the other 12 mornings and afternoons in the week? There's no cultural mediator. Everything is left to a sort of prison slang, prison Creole language, a mix of Arabic and Italian, gestures, body language, and yelling. And that's the language of the prison when you don't speak the language. So there's inevitably, you're going to incur disciplinary offenses. They tell you, get out, face the wall, do this, give me that, you don't understand. people start yelling at you, and this is how the system again becomes criminogenic. You get disciplinary offenses, you don't get early release benefits. All right, so everything is much more difficult, even for what might seem a silly problem like language problem, but it ends up being a huge problem. And then there's also the support. We all know how important family support is to kids. If you're an Italian kid, you might get visits by family or friends, but if you're an Egyptian 17-year older, you don't have no family, you don't have friends, you don't have anyone who can come and pay you a visit or bring you cigarettes or some orange juice. On top of that, the family, in this case, and I'm sure that it's a very common story, the family puts a lot of pressure on these kids. They paid a lot of money to make them escape to Europe. They want to, I mean, the worst case, they want to see a return on their investment. They expect these kids to start paying back and sending remittances back home. In this case, they were extremely disappointed, to say the least, that Khalid, instead of making pizzas in his cousin's shop, he was, in jail. So they call him a failure. They call him a disgrace for the family. They blame him that the mother fell ill because of that. And Khalid goes down. He becomes depressed. He becomes very anxious. He has a sense of failure. He sees no hope. 3 years is an extremely long time horizon when you are 17. So 3 years in jail. There's a moment when he attempts suicide after a phone call with his family. They find him with a bed sheet tied around his neck, hanging from a bed. It's a bit of a goofy attempt. They managed to rescue him. They sent him to the hospital. Maybe he wouldn't have succeeded, but that's not the point. The point is that this kid was completely lost. He had no perspective in his life at that point. And again, who is there to help him, to lend him a helping hand? Well, luckily he ran into a very caring social worker, and that's also where I came into play in Khalid's story. They realized that, for example, not having a permit of stay was a major concern in his mind. So we managed to apply for international protection from inside the jail, which is not very often the case. There's a lot of barriers in accessing permits of stay from inside the jail. Very simply because you cannot go to the police to apply and give your fingerprints. You are in jail, you're restrained. It's very difficult to access that kind of procedure. Somehow it's possible, but you do need to be surrounded by people who care. And this is not always the case. But anyway, in this very dark moment in Khalid's story, he enters, he does find a social worker who takes some care of him, and somehow they want to try and do something about him.
Alberto?
Yeah.
Scusami, possiamo avviarci verso le conclusioni?
Certamente.
Grazie.
This is my just a couple more minutes. So what about alternatives to detention? This is another problem for foreign kids. There's if you don't have, imagine you want to apply for house detention. Well, you need to have a house to be placed. If you have no family or friends in the outside world, it's very hard to apply for these kind of alternative measures. It might seem a very practical obstacle, but it's a huge one. An Italian kid would apply for house detention at his parents' place. Well, this is not the case for an accompanied kids. I already mentioned that social services are overworked and underfunded. There's very few people who care. So it's difficult to draft probation projects. There's no funds for these kind of housing, labor projects. Well, in theory, they exist, but at the end of the day, who's going to do it for you if they have no funds and no spaces to send you to live and to work? And I just want to mention a last chapter in this story. I already mentioned the difficulties in obtaining a permit of stay from inside the prison, but this is a crucial part of in the release phase and the reintegration in society, which is the ultimate goal in all well, generally in the detention system, but even more so in the juvenile justice system. If you don't have a permit of stay when you are out, well, it's a big problem. You cannot get an ID. You cannot get a work contract or a housing contract. If you have you don't look too Italian. It's sad to say, but you're incredibly more likely to run into police checks. In fact, I never ran into a police check in my life, and these North African kids or African kids or anyone who doesn't look Caucasian white in Italy is very likely to be checked by the police. And if you don't have a permit of stay, well, they might hold you, put you in police holding cells, and that's where the system again becomes criminogenic. But there are some opportunities for juvenile offenders, and I'm coming really to the end of my presentation. What are these opportunities? I want to mention especially one. There's Article 18, paragraph 6 of the Italian immigration law. It's a special permit. It belongs to the family of social protection permits, and it's a special permit for juvenile offenders who, they have been detained as minors, and if they participated in a social reintegration program, they gave proof of being on the right path, so to speak, and they were part of a rehabilitation program. They can be granted this permit. There needs to be a favorable opinion by the prosecutor, the judge. But at the end of the day, if you're followed by juvenile social services and your behavior was good, it's not so hard to get it. And it is a big opportunity for people who, in Khalid's case, he got asylum or something that resembles asylum, but because of his criminal presence, he couldn't get refugee status, but he did get a permit of stay. We call it special protection. But a lot of other kids, they cannot get asylum. They don't come from persecution contexts. So what kind of permit of stay are they going to get? They go out of jail. They are already over 18. They cannot get a permit for children. It is an issue. So this Article 8, paragraph 6 might be the best chance for juvenile offenders upon release. And I'm going to stop there because I'm way out of time. Thank you for your attention, and I'm available for any question or comment afterwards during the discussion. Thank you.